She did not say a word, but I knew. I knew something had changed in the way she looked past me. I knew her smile was still there, but it was no longer resting in her eyes. And I knew the room had gone quiet for a reason neither of us wanted to name. And for the first time, I understood that silence can sometimes tell the truth better than words. It happened outside a small flower shop just before closing. The lights inside were still warm, but the sign on the door had already been turned around. A few unsold flowers stood in metal buckets near the window, leaning softly as if the day had taken more from them than anyone noticed. And I thought of you, not because you were weak, because you had spent so many years being strong without asking anyone to understand the cost. Maybe you know what it feels like to say nothing, because speaking would take too much from you. Maybe you have smiled through moments where your heart was quietly asking someone to notice. Maybe you have carried pain so gracefully that people mistook your quietness for peace. That is what opened something in me. I realized I had been listening to your words, but missing the truth behind your quiet. And tonight, I need to admit this gently. You did not have to say anything. Your silence had already told me everything. I used to think I was good at reading people. That was one of the stories I told myself. I thought I could sense sadness. I thought I could recognize tiredness. I thought I knew when a heart was carrying more than it wanted to reveal. But you taught me that noticing is not the same as understanding. That evening outside the flower shop, I kept looking at those unsold flowers in the metal buckets. Some were still beautiful, but their stems had begun to bend slightly. They had not fallen apart. They had not lost their color. They were simply carrying the weight of a long day. And for some reason, that image stayed with me because it reminded me of the way many women survive, still graceful, still composed, still giving beauty to a room, but leaning inward from years of being strong, where they should have been held. Maybe that is why your quiet affected me the way it did. You did not ask me to understand you. You did not explain the tiredness behind your eyes. You did not name the disappointment. You simply became still. And I felt the truth before I knew what to call it. I need to confess something here. At first, I was afraid of your silence, not because it was cold, because it was honest. Words can be softened, smiles can be offered, politeness can cover almost anything. But silence, when it comes from a woman who has finally grown tired of explaining herself, carries a kind of truth that cannot be dressed up. And I knew there was something I had missed. Hey, I knew there were moments when I should have asked better questions. I knew there were times when your answer had sounded simple, but your heart had not been simple at all. That realization did not arrive like guilt. It arrived like recognition, the kind that makes a man stand still and finally admit he had been looking at the surface while the real story waited underneath. Maybe you know that feeling. 2, maybe you have answered, "I'm fine," because the real answer would have required too much strength. Maybe you have looked away to keep your heart into a room that did not feel ready for it. Maybe you have learned that being quiet is sometimes easier than being misunderstood again. If that is true, then I want to say something carefully. I am sorry for every time I believed the small answer and missed the deeper one. I am sorry for every time I heard your voice but did not hear the weight beneath it. I am sorry for every time I admired your strength without asking what it was costing you. Those are not easy words to say. But they are true, and perhaps that is why this memory will not leave me. Outside that little flower shop, I finally understood that your silence was not empty. It was full of things you had carried with grace, full of words you had learned not to waste, full of tenderness protected behind restraint, full of tiredness no one had earned the right to touch carelessly. There was a small ribbon tied around one of the flower buckets, a thin white ribbon. It moved slightly whenever the evening air passed through the street. I watched it for a moment and thought about how often soft things survive by holding themselves together. That ribbon became a small symbol in my mind, not dramatic, not important to anyone else. But to me, it looked like the quiet strength of a woman who keeps herself composed while life keeps pulling at her. And maybe that was you. Maybe that has been you for longer than anyone knows. A woman who did not always need someone to fix what were hurt. A woman who did not always not someone to notice when the silence changed. I did notice. Late, maybe. But I noticed, and once I noticed, I could not pretend anymore. Because there is a difference between a woman being quiet, a woman becoming quiet. One may be her nature. The other may be her heart protecting itself. And that is the truth I could not ignore. You had not stopped feeling. You had simply stopped offering your deepest feelings to places that did not know how to hold them. That is the first truth your silence gave me. And there is another truth waiting underneath it. A truth I did not want to admit at first. Because once I understood your silence, I had to ask myself what I had done to make you feel you needed it. Once I understood your silence, I had to ask myself what I had done to make you feel you needed it. That question followed me home, not loudly, not cruelly, but faithfully. The way some questions do when they know they are finally ready to be answered. I walked through a narrow side street where most of the small shops had already closed. The windows were dark. Metal shutters had been pulled down. A few signs swung gently in the evening air. Near the corner, there was an old watch repair shop. The light inside was still on. Through the glass, I could see tiny tools arranged carefully on a cloth. A magnifying lens rested beside a half-open watch. The hands of several clocks on the wall had stopped at different hours, as if time itself had forgotten how to agree with itself. I stood there longer than I expected. Because suddenly, I thought about timing. Not the timing of life, the timing of attention. How often we notice someone only after their heart has already grown quiet. How often we ask what is wrong after they have spent months trying to show us. How often we call it silence when really it is the final result of not being heard soon enough. That thought hurt me because I wondered if I had done that to you. Maybe not with cruelty, maybe not on purpose, but with distraction, with caution, with my own emotional distance, with a kind of calmness that looks respectful from the outside but can make another heart feel alone. I need to admit something. There were times you were not hiding. You were waiting to be noticed, and I mistook waiting for peace. There were times your voice changed slightly, and I did not follow the change. There were times your smile became smaller, and I told myself you were only tired. There were times you offered me a quiet chance to come closer, and I remained careful because careful felt safer than honest. That is the part I do not like seeing in myself, because it means your silence may not have appeared all at once. Maybe it was built slowly. One unanswered feeling at a time, one missed pause at a time. One moment when you needed warmth and received distance instead. Maybe you know how that happens. Maybe you have slowly stopped explaining yourself to people who only understood you when your feelings were convenient. Maybe you have grown quiet. not because you had nothing left to say, but because you had finally learned who was not truly listening. And maybe over time, your heart became tired of knocking on rooms that never opened gently. If so, then I understand Sinampanawas, that I should have something now that I should have understood earlier. A woman does not always become insolent because she is angry. Sometimes she becomes silent because she is tired of translating her pain for people who keep pretending they do not understand the language. That is a hard truth. But it is true. Inside that watch repair shop, one clock near the back suddenly moved. Only one hand shifted forward. A small sound. Almost nothing. But I heard it through the glass. And it made me think about how little movement it can take for a heart to reveal that it is still alive. A glance. A pause. A softer answer. A sentence that stops before it reaches the truth. Maybe those were the movements I missed in you, not because they were invisible, because I was not humble enough to look carefully. I thought love was about the big admissions, the clear conversations, the moments where someone tells you exactly what they need. But now I think Macharla Thaze, love listens before the breaking point. It listens before the voice shakes. It listens before the woman has to become loud in order to be believed. And that is where I failed you, not by refusing to hear you, but by waiting until your silence became undeniable. There is a difference, and it matters. As I continued walking, I passed a laundromat with bright lights and empty machines turning slowly behind the glass. Someone had left a basket on one of the tables filled with neatly folded towels. The place looked clean, ordinary, almost peaceful, but something about it stayed with me. Those machines kept turning, even though no one was watching, and I thought of you again. How much you may have carried quietly while life assumed you were fine. How much emotional labor kept moving inside you while everyone else saw only composure. How many feelings you folded neatly so the day could continue. That image broke something open in me. Because I realized your silence was not only about what you did not say, it was about everything you had already said in smaller ways, your restraint, your tired smile, your careful answers, your sudden distance, your way of becoming polite when perhaps you needed tenderness. Those were not empty signs, they were language. And I had been too slow to learn it. Maybe this is why your quiet stayed with me, because it was not accusing me, it was teaching me. It was showing me that love requires a deeper kind of attention than I had been giving. Not attention to beauty, not attention to kindness, attention to the changes in a woman's spirit when life has asked too much of her. That is what I finally began to understand. You did not need me to read your mind. You needed me to care enough to notice the parts of you that had stopped asking. And there is one truth beneath that which I am still learning how to say. Your silence did not only reveal what you were carrying, it revealed what I had been avoiding. That truth came to me the next morning in a place I never expected. A quiet bus stop near the edge of town. The sky was pale. The street was still waking up.
A few cars passed slowly, their headlights fading in the early light.
On the bench beside me, someone had left a pair of reading glasses in a soft brown case. Glasses. I sat there looking at them for a long moment. Glasses are such simple things. They help a person see what was already there. And maybe that is why they unsettled me. Because I began to realize that I had not failed to see you because you were hidden. I failed to see you because I was not ready to look closely. That is a different kind of confession, and it is heavier. And for a long time, I told myself I respected your quiet. I told myself I was giving you space. I told myself I was not pushing, not demanding, not crossing lines, and maybe part of that was true, but another part was fear. Because if I looked too closely, I might have seen how much you mattered. If I listened too carefully, I might have heard how deeply your silence was asking for tenderness. If I came closer, I might have had to become more honest than I was ready to be. That was what I had been avoiding. Not your pain, my responsibility to meet it gently. Maybe you know what it feels like when someone uses distance and calls it respect. Maybe you have waited for someone to come closer while they stood politely far away and convinced themselves they were being kind. Maybe you have carried a quiet ache because no one wanted to be cruel, but no one was brave enough to be truly present either. That kind of loneliness is difficult to explain because nothing dramatic happens. No one shouts. No one leaves a room loudly. But something inside the heart learns to stop reaching. I think that happened to you. And maybe it happened because of people like me. People who cared, but not courageously enough. People who noticed, but not deeply enough. People who felt something, but hid behind calmness because calmness kept them safe. I am not proud of that, but I am finally honest about it. The bus arrived and left without me getting on. I watched it pull away, its reflection sliding across the glass wall of the shelter. For a few seconds, I could see my own face in that glass. Older, quieter, less certain than I used to pretend. And I thought about how many times life gives us a chance to understand someone before it becomes too late. Not too late to love them, but too late to love them without regret. That thought stayed with me because your silence had become a kind of mirror. It showed me that I had been waiting for you to speak clearly, while you may have been waiting for me to listen differently. And that is where the story changes. Because once a man stands like that silence is only the woman's burden. Sometimes silence grows in the space where courage should have been. Mine as much as yours, maybe more. And there is another truth rising from this one, a truth that makes me look at your quiet with even more respect. Because if you became silent after not being heard, then the fact that your heart stayed gentle is something I should never have taken lightly. If your heart stayed gentle after not being heard, and then I should have honored that more carefully. That truth followed me into the afternoon. I found myself outside a small community center where a group had just finished meeting. The front doors were open. People were leaving slowly, carrying notebooks, folded sweaters, paper cups, little pieces of ordinary life. Inside, near the wall, there was a long table with name tags scattered across it. Some names had been taken, some were still there, and one name tag had slipped halfway under a stack of papers, almost hidden. I stood there looking at it, because sometimes a woman can feel exactly like that. Present, useful, included, but still somehow hidden beneath everything people needed from her. And I thought of you again. I thought about how many times you may have been in the room, giving your attention, offering your patience, making others feel welcome, stayed unseen. That realization humbled me, because I had mistaken your gentleness for ease. I thought if you were still kind, you must still be untouched. But now I understand something different. Some of the kindest women are not kind because life was easy with them. They are kind because they chose not to become what hurt them. That is not weakness, that is character. And maybe that is why your silence moved me so deeply. It was not only pain, it was restraint, it was dignity. It was the quiet strength of a woman who could have become hard, but somehow remained human. Maybe you know what that costs. Maybe you know what it means to keep answering gently when part of you is tired. Maybe you know what it means to hold back anger, not because it is not just justified, but because peace has always mattered to you. Maybe you know what it means to be misunderstood and still not let bitterness take the best part of your spirit. If so, I want to say this carefully. I see that now. Say it. Maybe late, maybe imperfectly, but I see it. There was a bulletin board near the entrance of the community center. Notes were pinned in neat rows. Volunteer hours, local events, support meetings, lost keys, a request for help moving furniture. Ordinary little notices from people needing something. I looked at that board and thought about how many lives are quietly held together by women whose names rarely become the headline. Women who organize, women who remember, women who notice, women who keep showing up even when they themselves are tired. And maybe that was another part of you I had failed to understand. Your silence did not mean you had nothing left to give. It meant you had given so much that your heart had begun saving a little space for itself. That was the new truth. Not all quiet is withdrawal. Sometimes quiet is self-respect finally arriving. Sometimes silence is not a wall. Sometimes it is a boundary built by a woman who has spent too long to being available to everyone but herself. And when I understood that, I felt something shift in me. Because I realized I should not ask your silence to disappear just so I can feel forgiven. I should learn how to respect what it is protecting. That thought stayed with me as I stepped back outside. A small tree stood near the entrance, its branches tied gently to a wooden support so it could grow straight without breaking in the wind. The ribbon around the support was soft, almost careful. And I thought of your heart, not broken, not weak, just deserving support, deserving care, deserving someone who understands that strength can still need tenderness beside it. I think that is what I missed before. I saw your strength, but I did not see how much tenderness your strength deserved. And now, every time I remember your quiet, I do not hear emptiness. I hear a woman finally choosing not to explain herself to rooms that have not learned how to listen. That deserves respect, not pressure, not questioning. Respect. And there is still another truth beneath this respect, a truth I have I've been afraid to admit because it changes my place in the story. If your silence was self-respect, then my love cannot be proven by making you speak. It can only be proven by becoming safe enough for you not to need this silence anymore. If my love cannot be proven by making you speak, then it can only be proven by becoming safe enough for you not to need the silence anymore. That truth stayed with me longer than I expected, because it asked something difficult of me. It asked me to stop thinking of love as something I felt and start treating it as something I had to become. There is a difference. Feelings arrive. Presence is chosen. Desire can be sudden. Safety is built slowly. And I had not always understood that. A few evenings later, I walked past a small pottery studio on a side street I had never noticed before. The lights were still on one side. Shelves lined the walls with bowls, cups, and unfinished pieces of clay. Near the back, a woman was cleaning a work table, moving slowly, carefully, as if every object deserved gentleness. On one shelf, there was a small cracked bowl, not thrown away, not hidden, set aside with a thin line of gold tracing the break. I stood at the window and looked at it for a long time, because it made me think about what love does when something has been hurt. Immature love wants everything smooth, easy, untouched. Mature love understands that some hearts carry life where once pressed too hard. And those lines are not shameful. They are history. They are survival. They are survival. They are places where care must become more careful. I thought of you. I thought of the quiet places in your heart that may have formed because people rushed past them. Because someone did not listen soon enough. Because you had to become composed when you deserved to be comforted. And I understood something new. If I wanted your silence to trust me, I could not arrive with impatience. I could not arrive with impatience. I could not arrive needing proof. I could not arrive asking your guarded heart to make me feel important. I had to become steady enough that your heart did not feel watched. That is a different kind of love. Less dramatic, more demanding, because it means learning to be present without taking, learning to care without pressing, learning to stand near the truth without forcing it to unfold. Maybe you know how rare that feels. Maybe you have met people who wanted your story before they had earned your trust. People who asked questions but did not know how to hold the answers. People who said they cared but became uncomfortable when your truth did not arrive beautifully. That is why silence becomes necessary. Not because a woman has nothing to say. Because she has learned the cost of saying it to the wrong heart. And I do not want to be the wrong heart anymore. That is my confession here. Not poetic, not perfect, just honest. I want to become the kind of man whose presence makes your spirit loosen its grip little by little. Not because I demand it, because you finally feel no need to defend every tender place inside you. Inside the pottery studio, the woman picked up another unfinished bowl and placed it carefully beside the cracked one. The wet clay caught the light softly. It had not yet become what it was meant to be. And I thought about us, about how understanding someone is never finished in one evening. It takes time. It takes humility. It takes returning again and again without making the other person pay for how slowly trust grows. That was the new truth your silence gave me. Love is not proven by access. It is proven by patience, not by how much someone tells you, but by how gently you behave with what they are not ready to say. And maybe that is where I began to change. Because instead of asking why you were quiet, I started asking whether I had become gentle enough for your truth. That question did not accuse me. It refined me. It made me slower. It made me less proud. It made me understand that a woman's quiet is not an obstacle in the path of love. Sometimes it is the path where a man learns whether his affection is selfish or sincere. The path where he learns to listen without reward. The path where he learns that being trusted is not a right, it is an honor. And if you ever trusted me with even one sentence from that guarded place, I would not treat it lightly. I would know what it cost you. I would know that silence does not open for noise. It opens for steadiness. It opens for mercy. It opens for a kind of love that does not need to win. That is what I want to offer now. Not a speech, not a rescue, a steadiness you can feel, a calm that does not disappear when the conversation becomes difficult, a warmth that does not ask you to perform peace when you are still learning how to receive it. Because maybe the deepest thing I knew that night was not only that you were hurting, it was that your heart was still hoping someone would notice gently. And there is another truth beneath that hope. A truth that leads me toward the most honest confession I have made so far. If your silence was waiting for safety, then maybe my heart was waiting for courage. That was the confession I did not expect to find inside your quiet. For so long, I thought this story was only about you not speaking. But maybe it was also about me not arriving. Not fully, not bravely, not with the kind of emotional honesty a woman like you deserves. I understood that one evening in an old train station waiting room. The station was almost empty. A few benches lined the wall. The departure board clicked softly above the doorway, changing times for trains that had not yet arrived. Near the far corner, there was an abandoned suitcase, small and brown, with a tag tied around the handle. No one seemed worried about it. No one even looked at it. But I did, because something about that suitcase felt familiar. A thing packed for movement, a thing waiting to be claimed, a thing carrying what someone could not keep holding in their hands. And suddenly, I thought about the emotional luggage I had brought into, without admitting it, my fear of saying too much, my habit of stepping back when closeness became real. My tendency to make restraint look honorable when sometimes it was just old hurt wearing a calm face. I need to tell you the truth. Your silence did not frighten me because I could not understand it. It frightened me because I understood it too well. I knew what it meant to hold words back. I knew what it meant to appear composed while something inside was waiting for permission to breathe. I knew what it meant to hope someone would notice without forcing me to explain. And maybe that is why I was careful with you. But careful was not always kindness. Sometimes careful was fear. Sometimes careful was distance. Sometimes careful was my way of staying close enough to care, but far enough not to be changed. That is painful to admit. Because you deserved more than a man standing at the edge of your heart, calling his hesitation respect. You deserved someone willing to step closer with humility, not to demand, not to fix, but to meet you. Maybe you have known that kind of almost love. The kind where someone cares, but not loudly enough. Stays near, but not bravely enough. Feels deeply, but hides behind timing, caution, or false silence. And maybe that is why your own quiet grew heavier. Because sometimes a woman does not need a man to be perfect. She only needs him to stop making her wonder whether her heart is too much to be received. That thought humbled me. The departure board clicked again. A train was delayed. Then another. I looked at that old suitcase and felt something inside me loosen, because I realized I delayed myself too. Delayed honesty, delayed affection, delayed the words that might have given your heart rest. And there was the new truth. You were not the only one silent. I had simply hidden mine behind composure. You hid yours behind dignity. And between those two silences, something tender had been waiting. something neither of us knew how to name. That is why I cannot blame your silence. I can only learn from it. It showed me that love cannot survive on feeling alone. It needs courage. It needs timing, yes. But sometimes timing becomes an excuse when courage is missing. And I think I used timing that way. I waited for the perfect moment, a clearer sign, a safer conversation, a day when neither of us felt so tired. But life rarely gives perfect moments to imperfect hearts. Sometimes love asks them to be spoken gently before everything is understood. Sometimes it asks for one honest sentence, not a grand confession. Just enough truth to let the other heart stop standing alone. If I could return to that room where your quiet first changed, I think I would say less than I imagined. I would not explain everything. I would not try to become poetic. I would only say, I know something is different, and I do not want you to carry it alone. Maybe that would have been enough. Maybe not. But at least it would have been honest. And maybe honesty is the first safety love ever offers. There is still one truth waiting beneath this one, a truth that does not let me stay only in regret. Once I understood what my silence had delayed, I had to ask what kind of love your heart deserved from this moment forward. Not what would make me feel forgiven. Not what would make the past feel easier to carry. Not what would let me call myself a good man again. What your heart deserved. That question followed me into a quiet grocery store late one evening. The aisles were almost empty. A young clerk was stacking cans near the back. Somewhere above me, soft music played through an old speaker, interrupted now and then by the small hum of the lights. I had gone in for something simple, bread, milk, nothing that should have made me stop. But near the end of one aisle, there was a shopping list lying on the floor. A short list, written carefully. Bread, medicine, oranges, tea, small things, ordinary things, the kind of things someone remembers because someone else will need them. I picked it up and placed it on the shelf. And for reasons I could not explain, I thought of you, because some women love that way. Not always with dramatic declarations, but with remembering, with noticing, with quietly keeping life from becoming harder than it already is. And I realized something I should have known sooner. As a woman like you does not need love that only speaks when it is afraid of losing her. She needs love that pays attention while she is still. That was the new truth. Love cannot arrive only after silence becomes pain. Love must learn to notice before the heart grows tired. I had maybe not completely, but enough. Enough to know that if I truly cared for you, I could not keep offering late understanding and calling it tenderness. I had to become earlier with my care, earlier with my noticing, earlier with my honesty, earlier with the words that might help your spirit feel less alone. Maybe you know what it feels like to be loved late, to be appreciated after you have already grown quiet, to be understood after you have already stopped explaining, to be missed after you have already learned how to stand by yourself. There is a particular ache in that, because the love may be real, but part of your heart still wonders why it had to wait until you were tired. That thought stayed with me in the grocery aisle, and it made me understand what kind of love your heart deserved. Not loud love, not perfect love, not a man making beautiful speeches too much past. You deserved attentive love, and the kind that notices the change in your voice, the kind that remembers what matters to you, the kind that sees when your smile becomes effort, the kind that does not wait for your silence to become obvious before asking gently, "Are you carrying more than you are saying?" That is the love I wish I had brought sooner. Not because it would have solved everything, but because it would have honored you while your heart was still reaching. There was a small shelf near the register filled with oranges. One had rolled slightly away from the others and rested alone near the edge. I looked at it and thought about how easily a person can be separated from the warmth they once belonged to. Not visibly, not dramatically, just quietly. A little farther from being held, a little farther from being asked, a little farther from being understood. And maybe that is what happened to you. Maybe your silence was not sudden. Maybe it was the slow distance of a heart that had reached too many times without being met carefully enough. I cannot undo that, but I can learn from it. I can stop pretending that regret is enough. I can let regret become attention. I can let attention become humility. I can let humility become a better kind of love. That is what your quiet is teaching me now, not to chase what I failed to protect, but to become the kind of man who protects peace before it becomes absence. Because a woman like you should not have to disappear emotionally before someone realizes she was holding the room together. You should not have to become silent before someone understands your words mattered. You should not have to grow distant before someone recognizes how close your heart had been trying to stay. If these words are touching a place inside you, write, I knew. Sometimes two simple words can honor the truth a woman carried long before anyone else noticed it. And maybe somewhere in that small phrase, your heart can feel less alone. But there is still one final truth before the blessing. Because if I know what your heart deserved, then I also know what I must stop asking from you. If I know what your heart deserved, then I also know what I must stop asking from you. I must stop asking your silence to make me feel comfortable. I must stop hoping your quiet will turn into forgiveness just because I finally understand it. I must stop wanting you to explain the pain that I should have noticed sooner. That truth met me in an empty theater one afternoon. Not during a show, not when the seats were full and the lights were low. I arrived early for a small local event, and for a while I was alone inside that quiet room. Rows of red seats stretched toward the stage. Dust moved slowly through a thin beam of light. On the stage, one microphone stood in the center. I looked at that microphone for a long time. And I thought about how unfair it is when people only create space for a woman's voice after she has already grown tired of speaking. That was the new truth. Your silence is not something I get to rush open. It is something I must respect. Because if it took years for your heart to learn that quiet was safer than explaining, then love cannot ask it to become loud just to prove healing has begun. You know that better than anyone. Maybe there are things you have never said because the people around you only wanted the easy version of your heart. Maybe there are truths you kept inside because speaking them would have required someone to stay gentle after hearing them. Maybe you learned that not every room deserves your full voice. And if that is true, then I want to honor that. Not challenge it, not complain about it, not call it distance because it does not serve my need for reassurance. Honor it. There was a row of seats near the front, and one seat had a small tear along the edge of the fabric. Someone had repaired it with careful stitching. The repair was visible, but neat, not hidden, not ashamed. I ran my hand lightly over the armrest beside it and thought about how some hearts are like that, not untouched, not broken, beyond beauty, simply carrying visible places where life had to be repaired slowly. And maybe your silence is one of those repairs a careful stitching, a way your heart learned to hold itself together when people did not know how to handle the softer parts of you. I need to say this gently. I do not want to undo that repair. I want to become someone safe enough that your heart no longer feels it must hold itself alone all the time. That is not the same thing. One is pressure. The other is care. And maybe this is where love matures. It stops asking, why won't you open? And begins asking, have I become gentle enough to be trusted with what opens? That question humbles me, because for too long I wanted emotional closeness without fully understanding the responsibility of receiving it. I wanted truth, but I did not always prepare tenderness for it. I wanted access, but I did not always offer safety. I wanted your words, but I had not yet learned to honor your quiet. Now I know better, or at least I am learning. The theater lights flickered once above me, then settled. Nothing dramatic, but in that small change, I felt something inside me soften. Because maybe this story was never only about what you did not say. Maybe it was about whether I could become the kind of presence that did not make your silence necessary. And that is the final truth before the blessing. Love does not prove itself by forcing a woman to speak. Love proves itself by becoming a place where her heart no longer fears being hurt. If I can become that, even quietly, even late, then perhaps your silence has not been wasted. Perhaps it has taught me the one thing I should have learned long ago. How to listen with love. May this be the place where your silence is no longer treated like a problem. May it be understood as a language shaped by years of giving, waiting, carrying, protecting, and surviving things you did not always have the strength to explain. If no one has ever honored that quiet part of you, let these words do it now. Your silence was not emptiness. It was wisdom. It was dignity. It was your heart learning where it could rest and where it could not. And may the next love that comes near you understand that. May it not demand your story before it has earned your trust. May it not rush your healing to make itself feel important. May it not call your quietness distance when it is really your heart asking for care. May you be loved by someone who notices the small changes, the quieter answer, the tired smile, the pause before you say, I'm fine. The part of you that does not want to explain anymore, but still hopes someone will understand. because you deserve that kind of attention. Not loud attention, not possessive attention, gentle attention, the kind that sees without invading, the kind that listens without forcing, the kind that stays soft even when your truth arrives slowly. Maybe you have spent years being the woman who understood everyone else, the woman who made room, the woman who kept peace, the woman who carried more than people knew, because love made you responsible, even when no one thanked you for it, even when thanked you for it. But tonight, may your own heart feel carried. May your quiet feel respected. May your tired places feel safe. May your voice return only when it is ready, not because someone demanded it. And may you never again believe that being silent made you less worthy of love. The right heart will not need you to explain everything before it values you. The right heart will learn your quiet with reverence. It will understand that some women do not speak less because they feel less. They speak less because they have felt too much in rooms that did not listen well. And if this story touched a place in you that the world rarely sees, you are welcome here. Subscribe if this space feels like home. Press like only if these words found something true inside your heart. And if you want to leave one simple phrase below, write, I knew. Because sometimes 2 quiet words can honor a lifetime of things a woman carried without saying them aloud. May your evenings become softer. May your heart feel seen without performing. May love meet you gently, patiently, and without pressure. And may someone finally understand what your silence has been trying to say all along.